Okay, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Alencar, who's joining us from Glasgow, where she's at the end of the for a week at the climate conference and is thoroughly exhausted like the rest of us who are also there are. It was great that you managed to find time for one more commitment and what was a busy week. Anne did her master's degree at Boston University in the US, and then a PhD at Florida, and now she's a science director at IPAM, the Amazon Research Institute, and her work focuses on many aspects of the mapping and sustainability of the Amazon and the Cerrado biome. And thank you for joining us, Anne, and over to you.
Thank you, Yadvinder. Thank you for having me, and it's very nice to be here. I know some of the faces, and for me it'll be really nice to share with you some part of the work that we have been doing, trying to understand the patterns of fires and the deforestation in the Amazon, and also to talk about how we are taking this information and converting into simple, like technical notes that we hand into governments and try to help at least them to direct some of the actions. So I will share my screen. Yadvinder told me that we have a lot of time, so let's let me see this one. So are you seeing my screen?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, okay. So I'll be talking about deforestation and fire from a land tenure perspective, and also in the end I will just talk a little bit about emissions from degradation, which is a work that we have been doing together with some of the great people like Erica and Joss and Aragon and Camila. It has been led by Camila Silva. So to start talking about deforestation fire in the Amazon, in the Brazilian Amazon, it's always to understand the tenure situation and where the fire is happening, because that will helps us to indicate which type of measures it should be taken and which type of actors, of stakeholders need to be engaged in order to reduce deforestation. So when you look at the Amazon biome in the Brazilian Amazon, we see that half of the region is dedicated to some type of protection, legal protection, which are basically protected areas, indigenous territories, and what we call conservation units, like parks, extractive reserves, and things like that. So the other half is distributed between like private properties, in a way, so very small, medium, large holdings, properties that like practice agriculture, ranching, and this type of activities. And the other 1/4 of the Amazon is still public lands that are undesignated. A part of them, of it, is an undesignated public forests, which means that they were registered as forests, and they should be forests, but they were not designated or destined to become a specific conservation unit or indigenous territories. And the other part are just public forests that were not designated for anything, needed to be forest. So, and this is very important because all the solutions and the problems, they will in a way be related to this distribution of land. So also another aspect to the Amazon, to understand how this is happening in the Amazon, is how land use and land use change is happening. So we understand that for the past at least 4 decades, which is the range of time that Mapbiomas is capturing all the changes that are happening in the biome, we see that most of the area converted in the Amazon is dominated by pasture fields. And this is very important because most of the pasture fields areas, pasture fields are also very important. They are being used for land speculation as well. And this is not something new, but it's really interesting to perceive that. So all of the issues that have been bringing international attention to the Amazon in the past year, mostly during the Bolsonaro government, is fire. And we, a group of scientists in Brazil, have been trying to, in a way, to educate people about which type of fire are we talking about, and how this is very related to deforestation. And for that, it is crucial to have monitoring data on fires. So this is a picture of a product that we launched in August from Mapbiomas, which is a Mapbiomas fire product, which encompasses 36 years of burn scars, burned area, for areas, forest and non-forest areas for the entire Brazil, but this is just a shot for the Amazon. And what we are seeing there is all the areas that were burned at least once in the past 36 years in the biome. And well, you probably know more about forest ecology or rainforest ecology than myself, which I'm a geographer, but you know that tropical humid forest shouldn't burn that easily. But what we are talking about is about most, at least 41% of the burned area in Brazil burned in a biome that shouldn't burn, which means that something is going on there. And of course, most of these fires are related to deforestation, as we can see in the graph right here. So at least 48% of everything that burned during this period burned in pasture, like area for pasture or in pasture area, so for pasture cleaning. But we had 18% at least of the area that burned in the region burned in forest, standing forest. And it shouldn't happen. And this is the point that I want to make. And then we will come back to this in the end of the presentation. And why this is important? Because when you talk about fire, it's very important to understand the fire triangle. And I changed a little bit the fire triangle for the ones that are fire scientists, so please don't kill me. But I changed in a way just to express that for fire to happen, we need to have climate and weather good conditions for that to spread. We also need to have fuel materials in quality and good quality, so these fires can actually take form. But most important, and why I say it's most important, because it's the only thing that directly we can, how can I say, take out of the equation, which is the ignition source. So it's the only thing that we are, how can I say, directly responsible to take out from the equation. So if there is a very bad climatic situation in affecting the Amazon, causing severe drought And if you have a lot of fuel material, because the trees are losing water, so they start to shed their leaves and the canopy opens and we have more dry air coming in and drying out these materials. If we have this condition, and if we don't have an ignition, the Amazon is not going to burn. So that's why it's very important to reduce fire and to do everything that we want to do to reduce fire. We have to tackle the ignition source. We have to tackle who starts the fire. And this is all the points that we are making. So, of course, because we also want to mitigate climate change, to make at least try to reduce the damage on the climate and to influence the yellow part here, but we can directly impact the red in this triangle there. And we can do that with public policy. We can do that with societal engagement. We can do it with scientific engagement. We can do it with companies engagement. And this is the point. Anyway, but in general terms, and there are other literature that have published all different types of fires, but in general ways, we have, those are the three most common types of fire in the Amazon. So the ones that are strictly related with the deforestation process. So like cutting down, chopping down trees and let it dry and then burn it to convert all this biomass to pasture or crop fields. So this is one important way to use fire in the Amazon. And the other is once that pasture was formed and it was bad managed, so people use fire also to promote, how can I say, a more palatable, how can I say, grass for the to make the old pasture become new. So to renew the pasture. And those types of fires are the main sources of the third type of fire, which is becoming more common, which are the forest fires, the fires that affect standing forests. Of course, if we don't have, if the weather is not, how can I say, if it's not very dry, and if that forest is not very disturbed, so this fire doesn't go farther into the forest, and it stays in the edge of the forest, and probably in the following years, that edge and that portion of the forest will we'll have another fire event. So what is happening is that the forest fires that should be very, how can I say, rare in the landscapes, are in the Amazon landscape, are becoming more frequent. And this takes us to the Amazon today. And actually this was with information for September, but I just saw the release today from the information for October. And this tells us that we did have a major reduction in fire in the Amazon this year. So if you see the curves here, we have the red, like thicker red line. It represents the active fire hot pixels from January to September, but the October also showed a reduction. And what I see is a different pattern that we had before. If you look at the distribution of the history of hot pixels in the Amazon, we had a peak in September. And when we had the fire crisis in 2019, we had a peak in August. And that was very curious because that's why we were engaging in promoting a lot of, in calling attention of people, because if we had that much of fire in August, imagine what would happen in September. And because of all the pressure and I guess Manuela Machado, which is here, she did a very amazing job in putting together a piece on that, and I hope you have that soon published, that demonstrate that a lot of the efforts and pressure that we did as society, researchers and over the federal government, it gave some results, and we did reduce fires in September and October, even in a year that was not very dry and not very rainy as well. So in average climatic conditions year. So in the following year, we also had a huge peak in fires in August, so in last year, in 2020. But we also had an increase in September, as we saw it in the orange line in this graph here. This year, we had a very similar pattern of fire distribution compared to 2019, when we had the fire crisis, and you can see, but with a difference. In 2021, we had a La Nina event affecting the Amazon, part of the Amazon. And in September, where the latitudinal north part of the Amazon, I mean, I'm not saying above the equator, I'm saying a little bit below the equator, starts to burn, the rain came earlier. So that's why we did have a major reduction in fire activity in September and October this year. But when you look at the forest and the government, and yesterday, the vice president said that this reduction in fire activities in the Amazon were due to government actions. But in fact, when we look at the deforestation data, we see it clearly that here in the cumulative graph, that we have about the same rate of deforestation that we had last year. In fact, we are like maybe 30 to 40 square kilometers more than we had last year. So how come some government actions can reduce fire and not reduce deforestation? And so we are in the same level of deforestation. And here it shows like this, the role that climate played, that weather played this year in reducing deforestation. So we have here all these anomalies, positive anomalies in rainfall in this part of the Amazon. And those are the numbers of hot pixels. We see that in 2016 and 2017 were years, El Nino years, or that were impacted by very extreme dry events that really had like higher peaks of fires. In 2018, we had a La Nina event. In 2019 and 20, there were like considered average years, not very dry, extreme dry events happening, impacting the Amazon. But in 2021, we had a major influence on La Nina. So even though we had an August very hot. Anyway, So when you look on the deforestation data, we see, and that is just the opposite, showing a very change in the rates since Bolsonaro's government. And those, all the way we look the data, we see this. We see that, for example, this is the deforestation data from January to September using that pair. And we see an increase in average of 91% of deforestation from 2016-18 to now. So if we look, another way to look at, if we take the same period, if you compare produce with the pair, and we see the number of increase from one period to the other, there is maybe a small increase, a smaller increase, but even though in the Bolsonaro era we have at least 45% of increase in the rates of deforestation since he took power compared to previous years. And if you look at only the dead pair data, that goes to 71%. And those deforestation patches have also changed. We have larger deforestation patches taking place of the statistics of the Amazon deforestation again, as we had in the past. And that gives a very, how can I say, straightforward message that people are not afraid to be punished in the Amazon. So that's why. And this area here is a snapshot of one area that we overflew last September, showing like in at least less than 2 years, more than 3,000 hectares of forest areas deforested, big patches, very, what can I say, with a lot of machinery, which is something that usually was not so, we're not so used to see in the frontier areas of the Amazon. So right now, these people are making a lot of money with this invasion or occupation of public areas. And those are big investments. So probably it was about at least 3 million reais to do all this operation there. So people were investing high and at high risk, but they probably knew that during this government they wouldn't be punished. And coming back to the slide, the first slide that shows the distribution of the tenure situation of the Amazon. And when you look at the hot pixel distribution and deforestation alerts distribution, we see a pattern there. Of course, we are aware that most of the deforestation fires should happen in areas where there are private properties, small, medium, or large, because people are like converting forests to set some pasture or crop fields. But what we have seen is that at least half of the fires and a little bit of half then deforestation alerts are happening in public lands. And those numbers are increasing, and they are increasing mostly in undesignated public forests. And I will talk about that a little bit later. So what we have seen as well is that indigenous territories and other protected areas also have had some fire occurrence and some deforestation contribution to that. And of course, it should be close to zero, should have some, but very small contribution. But when you look at what is happening in public lands, and I will focus in all this, the three types of public lands here. If you look to indigenous territories, we see that all this process of land conversion are happening in very concentrated areas, that indigenous territories that are being either invaded or have strong connection with illegal logging and illegal mining. So just for you to have an idea, 3% of all the indigenous territories in the Amazon, which means about 10, they include 70% of the deforestation that happens in that category, and at least 50% of the active fires. And those are mostly located in this region of Pará state, which means like this southwestern portion of Pará state, along the Xingu and Tapajós basin, and the BR-163 highway and Trans-Amazon highway. One problem is that really people think that indigenous territories, they don't have that protection, formal protection in terms of land protection from land speculation as they had before, because really, like, people perceive that in this government, everything is possible. And a clear indicator of that is that, for example, this indigenous territory, Ituna Itatá, which is right here, is located near Belo Monte Dam. It is indigenous territories which hasn't finished all the process to being, I don't know how to say that in English. We say like homologada, but like just finish all the process, legal process, as to be determined as indigenous territory. And it was very frightening to see that 97% of this territory was had some CAR, which is a voluntary registry that we have in the Amazon, so people can actually, the producers have to do, the landowners have to do, so they can be in compliance with the environmental forest code, our forest code. So people were volunteering, saying that this land, which is an indigenous land, belongs to them, because they knew that this indigenous territory didn't go through all the process of becoming indigenous territory. And when we look at all the other indigenous territories in the Amazon, we see that there are some indigenous territories that have a lot of CAR or of registries being made, indicating that people are really speculating with land in indigenous territories, something that didn't happen much before this government. The same thing is happening with conservation units, parks and national forests, and it's very localized process as well. So 9% of all the conservation units held 77% of deforestation within that category, and most of them located in these hotspots of deforestation, which is the southwestern part of the Amazon. One of them, a very emblematic one, is the Flona Jamanchim, which is Jamanchim National Forest. It has been invaded, and it was the place where the fire day happened. I don't know if you remember, in 2019, when all the farmers together decided, okay, let's so we all burned the same day. And that was not a good idea, but at least this area was recognized by that. And this takes us to the undesignated public forests. So those, in fact, as I showed you before, are the main, I said this yesterday, the main cancer, not the forest, but the occupation, illegal occupation of this forest are the main problem that we face in terms of deforestation in the Amazon right now, in the Brazilian Amazon right now. So these forests, they represent at least 57 million hectares. So it's a lot of area. Most of them are part of the state, so they are undesignated public state forests. 44% are undesignated public federal forests, and they by law they should stay as forests, no matter to what they are designated to. And what we have seen is that there was a jump in the deforestation area in these public forests from 2018 to 2019, and became in the same level in 2020, and we have seen the same thing in 2021, and most of it are happening in federal undesignated public forests. Of course, most of the undesignated federal public forests are along the roads, so they are more accessible than the state forests. But even though the state forests that are closer to the roads, they have been less impacted by this process of illegal land occupation. And when we take a look on the CARs, the environmental rural register that have been overlaying these areas, and compare this with deforestation, we see that most of the deforestation that are happening inside these areas are happening in areas that CAR are overlaying with CAR, which means that people are thinking that, okay, I will do my car, register my car in a voluntary way there, and I will deforest this area. So in the future, the government would give some amnesty and say, okay, you can have these areas. This is gonna be yours, and that's why I don't know. We from the environmental movement and academics, and we have been so how can I say strong on arguing about this land regularization law that is in the government, which is saying that all the public lands that were occupied by, I think, 2012 or 14 can have the title, because this gives a signal to people that they can occupy illegal public lands now, and in the future they will be able to have the title. And we think this is not a good thing. Also, even though Amazonas has most of the undesignated public forests, these conversions are happening mostly in Pará and mostly in federal lands in Pará. And fire goes with it, because in this way, fire is very correlated with deforestation. And as you can see, there is increase in car registries in these areas. So from 2016 to 2020, we almost double the area registered in car, more than double, in fact. And and this happens in all sizes. And so at least 30% of the undesignated public forests are covered by illegal cars. And we just released it last week or the week before, technical note where we analyze what is occupying these areas that have been deforested in undesignated public forests. And mostly they are occupied by pasture, but at least 25% of the area have been abandoned, which means that it has been deforested, and I would say that for to be abandoned, which is a lost, so, and that takes us to forest degradation. I mean, all this deforestation and this increasing deforestation has an impact on emissions. Brazil, we just released that as well. The beginning of the COP, the week before the COP, we released the new SAG, which is a system of estimate of greenhouse gas emissions for Brazil. And we, for that assessment, we saw that at least 46% of the national emissions from greenhouse gases are related to land use change. And when we add agriculture, we go above 70% of the national emissions. So beyond deforestation, we know that deforestation in a way causes a lot of degradation. So we think it's very important to talk about emissions from degradation as well. And there are several elements of vectors, drivers of degradation. So high impact logging causes a lot of forest disturbance and generates degradation. Deforestation and causing like edge effects. Frequent and severe droughts cause tree mortalities in patchy areas. And those are elements that synergically interact with fires and recurrent fires. These fires, they do have a major impact in forest structure. This paper from Sul Trumbo and others, I think did a good job to represent what are the main impacts of disturbances and how it takes longer to recover. In terms, it can recover sooner, like some leaf area, evapotranspiration. Biomass takes a while. Diversity apparently takes never recovers or takes a longer time. In nutrients availability as well is the worst. But anyway, when we say that the Amazon forest, the Brazilian Amazon forest has more than 80% of standing forests, we think that, okay, these are healthy forests, okay, great, we have that, but in fact, not. A great portion of this forest is very impacted by fires, for example. And we saw that in the beginning, at least 18% of the area that burned in the Amazon burned as standing forest. And there are these forest fires, they are also drivers of emissions, and that have been accounted in the inventories, national inventories. So, if we take, for example, what we did, and this work was coordinated among has been coordinated among several scientists. There are some great people engaged, like Erika Alencar, Joss Aragão, Luiz Aragão, and Camila Silva has been the one that is kind of putting this all together. Just to have an estimate of the emissions, the net emissions of fires due to, of forest fires, degradation due to forest fires in the Amazon. And what we have learned so far by doing this exercise is that at least we got the 2020 map of all the standing forests that were affected by fires in the past 36 years. And this corresponded to at least 49% of all the area that was burned in forest along the period. So we have more than 100,000 square kilometers of primary standing forest degraded by fire and burned at least once. And we applied this losses factor of loss, which was 25% of biomass loss every time that this forest was burned. And we add this up to 10 years of forest loss, of loss in the process. So this curve was done by taking into account all the literature, the scientific information existing on the areas that were burned and then recovered in a way. This data took us to these numbers, which mean that if we only consider the areas that the emissions that have happened just due to like immediate combustion, we would have at least 37% of the emissions caused by these areas that were these fires. If we add the late emissions, which are basically the composition of the trees that have died due to fire in those periods, we had more 63% of the emissions. And this would represent 21% more emissions than the emissions related to deforestation in the period. So it's not something that we have to, to just like close your eyes to it. This exercise showed that in a very conservative way, because we are only taking into account the immediate combustion of necromass and only a factor of 60%. And we are also taking into account just the areas, the burned areas that were heavily burned, which means that they were mapped through MapBioma's collection 1, which caught mostly the areas that were heavily burned. And also we were accounting just for the late emissions related to the mortality of the trees. And this has an important impact on the, for example, inventory. This can have an important impact on the national inventory, because part of these emissions are happening in considered managed forests, which for our national inventory represents areas that are uptaking carbon and not releasing carbon. And that it's very, very important, because that would change completely our our net emissions by land use, land cover change, and forestry. So just to end, I think we have to start some way to reduce fires and deforestation in the Amazon. We can start to what I think is the easiest part, because it's to fight illegal deforestation. By fighting illegal deforestation that are happening mainly in the public lands, we need to have a very strong strategic enforcement. We have to designate public forests. We have to say that cars won't be allowed, for example, in public forests. Of course, we need also to have positive incentives to consolidate protected areas and forest-based economies, bioeconomy, investment in science and technology, incentives for private conservation as well. There are a lot of people that can deforest in the Amazon legally, so they need some incentives and support to small producers. Of course, I spent at least 45 minutes talking about problems and half 1 minute talking about possible solutions, but I will take questions so we can discuss more about the solutions. I have the SAGI data, it just shows the emissions, but I think this is the last one. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Annie. If you stop sharing the slides now, we can open up the floor to questions from everyone. So for the Q&A, feel free to just either raise your hand or pop your question in chat if you haven't got a good microphone. But if you're willing to, I'd invite you to directly ask questions to Annie. So while we're waiting for people to pop up with their hands, I'll kick off with one. So it's really interesting that half of the deforestation is on public land, so it becomes a governance enforcement thing rather than a sustainable livelihood question around that. I just wanted to know, who are the type of farmers or settlers that are doing this deforestation on public lands? Is it medium, large-scale speculators on land, or is it smallholders? And what's the pattern of deforestation that's going on, particularly on public lands?
Yeah, what we have seen is that in some indigenous lands and some conservation units lands, they are smallholders that are having the incentives to invade these lands. But in most of the areas that have been deforested in public lands, in undesignated public forests, for example, are larger patches. So those are huge investments, which I mean that people that have money. And this money can, I just saw an article today that connects all like drug trafficking with illegal gold mining, with illegal logging and land speculation. So apparently there is a whole set of criminal activities and groups installed in these areas of the Amazon, in these frontier areas of the Amazon. They are making a lot of money, or at least expecting to make a lot of money with all this, with this lack of governance that we have seen. And I think those are the main causes. I mean, the main groups there are doing like the forest in the Amazon. And which means that if huge groups and strong groups or criminal groups are deforesting lands in the Amazon, I mean, maybe small holders or see that they can do the same. So along the urban areas, you can see these trends as well happening by mostly by small holders. So it's a mix. but mostly is large operations.
Great, thank you. Eugenio, you have a question?
Yes, I have a more political and social question to you, Anne. I remember during the decades where the deforestation was decreasing, I had the feeling that the Brazilian society was very proud to show to the world that they were fighting deforestation. What is the situation right now, since almost, it's not a decade, but at least 5 or 6 years that deforestation is increasing, and in the international scene, people are talking about the Amazon. I imagine that the society is very divided, but what is your feeling in terms of general opinion of the Brazilian society? What do they think about the situation? Is there a higher awareness that, or they don't care? I don't know.
No, I mean, I think the Brazilian society as a whole, they really don't want to see the Amazon being deforested. This is my feeling. In urban places, most huge urban areas, people are more and more engaged in these environmental conservation issues. However, we have, I mean, we have strong groups, like there are political groups that act regionally in the Amazon, that want to come back in time, before we had all those governances established in the Amazon during the Lula government, for example. And they want to be able to, make a lot of money again, and easy money in a way. And I think this is what is happening, you know, and that's why when I present this, I always focus on, let's fight illegal activities in public lands first, because this should be a consensus that no one wants that. So I'm not even talking about engaging farmers in like putting them in a good path, or I'm not even touching on them. And if we just fight deforestation in public lands, we will reach the smaller rates of deforestation we had since monitoring was implemented. So we don't even need to engage, to have money to engage people in good practices, and neither of that. Just by fighting criminals' activities, we would reach the lowest rate of deforestation we ever had. And for that, it's very important to engage the private sector. And by engaging the private sector, society is a good way to press private sector, because this is all about reputation. And so we, if these people that are invading land and occupying legally the land, the public land, if they don't have to whom to sell, because what they are, the person that is going to buy this will not be able to sell its product, there won't be a market for the land. And this is what happened during the late 2000s, you know, because there was the soy moratorium. There is all this strong signal to the market that, okay, you shouldn't buy illegal, shouldn't buy soybean from the Amazon, otherwise.
Yes, but at that time there was a very strong political willing, which is
yeah,
not the case
exactly.
right now. So
this is
if
very
you don't have
important.
this base,
Yeah.
then it will not happen.
Yeah, and political will is very important. I said this today in the SPA lounge, and the Secretary of State was just by my side and said, "Oh, but we have political will."
I know, I saw you.
Yeah, and in fact, Pará State has a political will, and is demonstrating that. And he said the right thing. but they don't have money, you know, because they were heavily relying on the Amazon fund that was, you know, how can I say, stopped by this government. And the competency of the state to work in all public lands is very small. So they just work in state public lands. And the state, as we saw, the state public lands are the ones that have less deforestation. So, and they do have a role engaging in how can I say, in the licensing process. And it's true. But, you know, it's very complicated. And I would say that we need to send a signal, very strong signal, that no illegal deforestation in public lands is allowed. And the companies and the markets and the civil society should be on board of that. Because if there is no market for lands, people won't grab land. This is what I think at least.
Great, thank you. Feel free to switch on your cameras, anyone. It's quite nice to have a visible audience. You're comfortable with that for the Q&A. Tom, next.
Thanks, Yadvinder. Good to see you, mate. Hope COP treated you well. Olá, Anne, prazer te conhecer. Muito obrigado pela apresentação. Vou perguntar em inglês para todo mundo. So I've got two questions. The first one relates to that graph that you showed us before, with how long things take to recover in the wake of a forest fire, and it struck me just how long it takes for available nutrients to get back to what they were previously, and I suppose that would be really important because it's what I guess would underpin regeneration as well. Are there any ways we can intervene in places where fire has torn through to accelerate the regeneration of available nutrients and therefore help afforestation or recovery of that forest? Thanks.
Well, probably you might know this better than me, but I would say that at least taking out fire from the landscape would help a lot. And of course, I mean, to drive natural restoration or it's a difficult thing. I mean, even on the areas that have been deforested and people are trying to restore these areas along rivers and things like that, and sometimes it's not that easy. But I think at least impeding like these areas to suffer another disturbance is one thing that we can do. I don't know. It would be great to hear from you as well, because I know that there are a lot of people in this call that are working on this, and that would be nice to know other ways.
Not me, probably Yadvinder.
Well, I guess a lot of the thing there is that a lot of the nutrients are actually in the biomass. So once you've either taken down the trees or even burned and released the nutrients through emissions, aerosol emissions, rebuilding that biomass as a store of nutrients just takes time overall. So, and probably isn't worth, say, interventions like fertilizer or something like that. That would be too slow a process, I think. Okay, Erica. Yeah.
Oi, Annie, tudo bem?
Oi, Erica.
I cannot make my video work. Oh, maybe I can. Yes. Tudo bem?
Tudo
Parabéns
bom?
pelo relatório hoje.
Obrigada. Você foi embora.
So my question is a bit of a provocation, which you don't need to answer if it's true. I don't have an answer. That's why I want to reflect with you, which is about 2 days ago, the environmental ministry, Joaquim Leite, he said that where there is forest, there is poverty. And he was heavily criticized by indigenous leaders in COP. But I would like to see a reflection on how the scientific community can shift the paradigm of where there is forest, there is poverty, and actually say that where there is forest we could have richness.
Yeah, I think this is a very important thing, because we have been failing to demonstrate that forest promotes actually not rich things, but avoids the possibility or the probability of the people to fear what is being poor, really, like in terms of food security, for example, in terms of quality of life, which I mean several things that we have been going through by living in a city, in the periphery of a city, without a job, with bad sanitation. I mean, if you compare the two things, it's brutal, the difference. So experiment being, I'm gonna use this, being a poor, or not having money, because when he talks about poor, he talks about money, not about the other things. So imagine not having the money in a forest and not having the money in a city. How would you live? I bet you would live really bad in a city without money, but you can live well without money in a forest. And I don't think that this is enough. We need to be able, and this is what is the paradigm, as I said, we need to be able to demonstrate that these people that live in the forest, they can have money, but they can also have all the resources that they have there to have a better well-being. And this is what I want to believe, and we need to demonstrate that. And so and by doing that, we need to go beyond just thinking about the money, and I think this is the point. I don't have an answer. I don't know how to do it completely. We all want to believe that engaging in ecosystem services, valuing ecosystem services, having people valuing the forest for all the not all the ecosystem services that forests provide, but also by being in a forest, there is important, and we want to value that, and we want to value the people that live in harmony with that type of environment as well. But I think it's something that we need to answer, and we need to answer with indicators. And I think this is all. The science needs to take that and say, okay, let's solve that. For example, if I ask you, and this is something that we are thinking a lot about in IPAM, if I ask you how much or what is the size of the bioeconomy in the Amazon, or the economy of the social biodiversity in the Amazon, we don't know. But if I ask what is the size of the soybean economy in the Amazon, probably we'll know. We'll just do some clicks on the internet and we'll have that. And this is the challenge. When we talk about social bioeconomy, we talk about a diversity of products. And we need to organize that to be able to answer that question. Because when we answer that question, we will prove that we will give another framework for this poor condition that people are talking about.
Okay, I'll just follow up with another question. So last week we had the Glasgow Declaration on Forests, and there's at one part lots of governments like Brazil signing up to zero deforestation by 2030. But also another part of that was the big corporates signing up and saying they want to clean up their supply chains. And the ideal scenario, of course, is both governments and corporates are working in the same direction. But say in the context of Brazil, how much do you think, with those wonderful maps you were showing, we were overlaying cadastros with with public lands. How much do you think supply chain information is getting robust enough now that corporates could be able to say this is legal, this is illegal produce, and so we can push through with sustainability even without strong political support from governments? Or do you think that government participation is essential for that to work?
I think government participation is essential, but I think we are every day closer to have a better traceability tools to actually get this to be able to trace, how can I say, the chain of this, and to be able to relate illegal activities with legal cells in the Amazon. So, well, at least it's much better than 15, more than 15, maybe 12 or 13 years ago, when we had the soy moratorium. So we have better satellite images, we have better instruments for that. We have a more technology. Soon, I believe all the Amazon will have like digital connection, like internet all over. I believe on that. So we have all the elements and technologies to be able to do this traceability. So what I think we need really is like the engagement and the political will to do it. So I think we'll get there, and the market, as again, like society asks for that, is asking for that. The Amazon is a brand in a way. People want the Amazon safe for several reasons, and I think the companies are buying that, because maybe not because they think the Amazon is beautiful, but because they have been demanded to it, and I think there will be a way to figure out how to implement this traceability issue.
Okay, great.
I'm positive.
Yeah. Pliny, do you still have a question? Your hand was up earlier, but it's come down.
No, I just wanted to react to Erika's question. I think we should ask also those people who are saying that to demonstrate that deforestation bring prosperity. I mean, all developed country have made their forest transition, including France, and France is not a poor country. So I don't think there is a link between deforestation and prosperity. At the contrary, I don't think that we will be able to have a good agriculture, productive agriculture without forest. I mean, with the impact of climate change, deforestation will increase the problem of agricultural productivity. So it's always a question of tipping point. What far you can or you want to go in deforestation. So and a second comment, I think that next year there will be the election in Brazil. So we will see if the Brazilian society is concerned about deforestation in the Amazon. It might be an issue that will make, I hope, Bolsonaro lose the elections. I hope that this awareness, environmental awareness, will be an important issue in the vote. I hope so. Otherwise, I'm not very optimistic.
Yeah. No, you know what is funny is that, well, the last campaign, maybe we had just one candidate. Maybe Marina Silva was very strong about the having some plans for the environmental agenda or something like that, but that was not even important. I mean, Bolsonaro didn't have anything because he spent most of his time in the hospital. Oh, Bolus too, yeah. But this didn't got track on the, people didn't talk much about it. And in the end, what is the main stone in the shoes of Bolsonaro is the environmental agenda, because none of the rest, I mean, but the environmental agenda keeps bugging him. And let's see. I mean, I'm really worried, really, because I think the environmental issue got so big in Brazil, and I'm afraid that in the next election, it loses its power, you know. And this I'm afraid.
Okay, I'll return to, so again, last week, with the Glasgow Declaration, and also the surprise, I think, to many people that Brazil signed up to that. What's your reaction to how realistic a goal of zero deforestation by 2030 in Brazil would be, and also let's assume there's a favourable change in political winds next year, so there is some political buy-in, but also in that case, what's needed to achieve that? And what are the and is it even desirable? Or are there issues around smallholders and things that are much more complex? So.
Yeah, no, it is a complex thing. I think we can reach a strong reduction in deforestation in the next years, and I mean, we demonstrated that, we showed that, and I think it's totally possible. Maybe not to reach zero, but to reduce a lot. And as I told you, I mean, that I just present you, if you just reduce in public lands, we will get more than half of deforestation. But what I think is that Brazil signed something that, I mean, it's just a declaration, you know. I mean, it's just like everything that this government does. I mean, they say something and next day they just forget about it. They unsay what they said in a way. So, but I think it's something that we were happy that they signed, so we can press for it. And also, it's not exactly deforestation; it's forest loss. So, which means that also is the balance between the gain and the loss of forest, at least in a way. Well, I don't know if we continue doing the things the way that we are doing. Of course, we won't go closer to that. But I think people are very optimistic on the change in the government. And I think what I saw here and what I see even more that is very different from, for example, other COPs, is that there are more conversations between companies and governments and civil society and scientists and social movements, and I think I see this as a very positive, how can I say, way, in a very positive way. Because even though we have two Brazils, you know, the Brazil from the industry that is in the official portion of the conference, showing the great Brazil. We also had a very plural Brazil here at the hub that had all these groups, these stakeholders, and from very powerful companies. So we're talking about the biggest companies. So I'm hopeful for that. I hope it's not totally greenwashing in a way. I hope there are some commitments that are driven by the pressure of society and driven by maybe what we are facing already, you know, which are the externalities of climate change.
Okay, great, thank you. Any final questions? If not, I think that's a great point to end. And let's hope it's been an interesting week for both many levels of action and declaration, but also, as you said, this networking and initiatives there as well. So let's hope we see big positive changes in the right direction in the next coming years. And thank you for the amazing detail in which you present there, the analyses that are there, and careful tracking, which is essential to anything that gets done.
Thank you, Yadvinder. I mean, you have been an amazing scientist, and your group, your lab, and also you have been producing a lot of great scientists as well. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you. There's more to give you applause rather than me applause, but so if we can unmute, we have a tradition of giving audible applause to our speakers here. So if you unmute and give an audible round of applause. Great.
Thank you. I wish we could have a beer now, but
that will be fantastic.
Everybody left. I will have a beer by myself.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah. Anyway.
Great.
Time for a beer.
Yes.
It's time for a beer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.